and Jesus ends up rebuking him for setting his mind on the things of man, not on the things of God. And then it's not until this moment in Mark 15 at the cross when a Roman soldier of all people comes to this revelation moment of Jesus as the Son of God. What a brilliant kind of arching narrative. We can often assume that God is distant or far away. But through Jesus, the barriers between humanity and God are removed. Schizo, torn, ripped. The heavens have been torn. The curtain is ripped. The veil is removed. The God who is mighty, the creator of the universe, holy, full of splendor and majesty, pure, searingly holy. The veil that shrouds our visibility of him is torn and pulled to one side, and connection with him is restored. We come into relationship with him through the torn veil, whether that's the heavens or the curtain or the scales on our own eyes. The story of Jesus is about God being present, not distant, but the barrier's been torn and removed and ripped. The ministry of Jesus is all relationship, all gathering people into him that knew him closely and listened to him and shared food with him and touched him, fully present in close relationship with people. And we have this big, booming voice. The Voice, not the TV show. There's no spinning chairs in this one. You are my son. With you I am well pleased. What an affirmation. The King of the heavens speaks over this man from Nazareth. But obviously there's a backdrop to the story, but for the watchers, they're like, what on earth just happened? He's from Galilee. That's a rubbish place. Who is this guy? His dad's a tradesman. Not even like not one of the Jewish religious dynasty families. He's not an influencer. He's not anybody to be listened to or looked at. He just rocked up by the water where John the Baptist, the crazy man with the locusts and the weird costumes, baptizing people. And suddenly the heavens split open. And there's this affirmation moment where God declares, for anyone who wants to listen, this is who he is. And you'll notice he's not done a blind thing yet. His ministry hasn't even begun. And in a couple of pages and chapters, we're going to read all sorts about healing and deliverance and incredible teaching and miracles, so many miracles that they couldn't even write them all down. And we tend to affirm people on the basis of performance, right? Annual reviews, salary increments, yearly targets. God affirms people. God affirms Jesus before he's done anything. Because he's a loving father who affirms who we are first. And then maybe what we do secondary, maybe not. Maybe just that first affirmation's enough. God is pleased with Jesus. He loves him unconditionally. And we are co-heirs with Christ. And we share in his inheritance. And so when God speaks over Jesus, do you know you can receive the affirmation of God yourself? He's pleased with you. He loves you, in many cases, in spite of what we do. God does not see us just for the story so far, but actually would speak with prophetic spark over you and biblical truth over you, seeds of a new identity in Jesus. He would affirm your identity as a child of God. How wonderful to be affirmed as a child of God before we do a thing. So often in conversations, I'll hear people say, kind of examining their weakness, saying, I wish I could be better, wish I could honor God more. This moment, this glorious, beautiful moment where the overflow of God's affection is so great that he would rip the heavens and say, I love you. Before you do a single thing, I love you. So we have all of this happening. You think, right, this is the moment where the ministry of Jesus will kick on. They've waited long enough. He's a young adult now. They've waited hundreds of years of prophetic promise. Now's the time. Let's get going with the miracles and the teaching. Let's get going with the royal robes. Let's get going with the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. But no, apparently not. Because what needs to happen next is the Spirit is going to lead, or as Mark says, drive. Like, that's a really powerful language, because you drive cattle with a whip to make them move. Like, the Spirit agitated Jesus into the wilderness for 40 days. This was not an accidental moment. This wasn't Jesus was tempted into the desert. This isn't Jesus meandered into the desert. This isn't Jesus got lost and found himself there by chance. This is the Spirit of God agitating Jesus into the desert, into the wilderness, not into ministry. So odd after such a powerful encounter moment. It's definitely not the script that we would choose for our lives, right? See, I like the narrative that says I get filled with the Spirit, and then before I get home, I lead several people to the Lord. That's a good narrative, and we'll go for that one, yeah? Let's stop there and receive that from the Lord. So 40 days is about 6 weeks. That's like a school summer holiday. I'm not sure who that drags out for most, the kids or the parents. But there's a sense at the beginning where you're like, this is going to go on forever. And because it's summer, the days are so long. And it literally, you reach that point halfway through the summer holidays where you're like, I don't even know what day it is. I've not changed out of my pajamas for like, I don't know how long. There's a point in early marriage where I was working in schools where I got school holidays. So Joe would go off to work at the beginning of the day, and there I'd be in my pajamas with a cup of coffee playing Championship Manager. And Joe would come home at the end of the day, and there I was with loads of cups around me and loads of plates, still in my pajamas playing Championship Manager for 6 weeks. It's wonderful. I know, I was a catch, right? All manner of DIY not done during that time. 6 weeks in a wilderness can feel like forever. It's great when you're doing something you're enjoying. It's great when you're kicking back. This isn't like 6 weeks by the pool at a holiday resort. This is 6 weeks of rough ground. This is 6 weeks of where's the next meal, where's the next drink? This is 6 weeks of isolation. This is 6 weeks of voices of temptation coming again and again and again. And we can take from this that we know that Jesus knows what it is to live in the tough place, in the dry, barren season, in the place of temptation and loneliness. This isn't momentary. This is sustained. This is sleep deprivation. This is discomfort. This is maybe gashed skin from catching himself on a rock. We're told wild animals. You know, we experience a lot materially, but we can still have moments where it feels like we're living in a bit of a wilderness. an uncertainty around the career or relationship or finances or health or well-being. We can experience a sense of brokenness or disconnect from the rest of the world. We can experience a sense of relentless temptation. God appears in human form, in flesh and blood. And he doesn't just experience the banquets, the feasts, the parties, the great mates, the miracles. I love that Jesus knew what hardship felt like. He walked that journey. It's interesting that Mark does not overemphasize the description of Satan. It's quite subtle. It's like, oh, by the way, Satan was there. Move on. Low key. Interesting. Doesn't overstate the power of evil in this narrative. And in some way, you get the sense that for Mark, the fact that Satan was there was 1,000,000 times less significant than the fact that Jesus was there. So I'd encourage you in your wilderness moment to focus on the fact that Jesus is God with us. That you make your stand against the schemes of the enemy who would steal, rob, starve, destroy by focusing on the presence of Jesus. Obey every instruction in Scripture and believe every promise. So we can think that hardship or the presence of evil means that there isn't a God. How can there be such suffering and sadness? How can there be such injustice? But Mark doesn't really seem to wrestle with the thing. He just says, well, there's evil, but there's also God. We do not need to be afraid of Satan. We do not need to be pulled off course and fall into traps. Because in this narrative, Satan does not win. That's not where the story is leading. Jesus spends the whole of Mark's gospel liberating people from the clutches of evil, sickness, poverty, injustice. And then on the cross and the resurrection, we see him as the great liberator. And in Mark 1, we see clearly that the enemy has no hold on him. And you'll see that theme again and again and again. It doesn't matter how tricky the situation. It doesn't matter how far gone the person is, how tough to reach they might be, how many chains have been wrapped around them, how many barriers have been placed between them and community. Jesus is supreme over both the physical and the spiritual realm. God is not the underdog in the spiritual realm. We are told our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers and authorities. But never hearing that Jesus is an underdog, because he is not. There's still evidence of evil in the world. And Jesus told his disciples very clearly in John 16, in this world you will have tribulation. You will. You just will. But take heart, because I have overcome the world. Difficulty will be inevitable, but we fix our eyes on Jesus, who has overcome the world, who is the author and perfecter of our faith, who sustains the cosmos, who is sat down at the right hand of the Father, who is fully present because the veil has been torn. And it's perfectly possible for us to be fully present in the moment, to have sorrow and to mourn for what is wrong, while still recognizing and trusting in a different and better kingdom. Jesus is not in trouble in Mark 1. He's not wounded or on the ropes. He is persevering, full of the Spirit through temptation and wilderness. We can follow his example, and Mark declares that God wins. This is Jesus wins in my thing, but I ad-libbed. See what I did there? And we don't know what it looks like for the angels to minister to Jesus. You can let your imagination run wild on that if you want. I don't think it's a return to Eden where the lions have got no teeth anymore. At times, it can feel like we are surrounded by wild animals with big claws and sharp teeth, animals of economic uncertainty, rising energy prices, global conflict, sickness, broken relationships. And if they all bite at the same time, this is gonna hurt. And we'd like to pray that they just don't exist. But they do. The wild animals exist. The teeth and the claws are real. And they don't necessarily just go away. Actually, the early Christians were fed to said wild animals for entertainment. There will be tribulation moments where there are wild animals. Do not despair, because this is not the end of the story. Sometimes we ask where God is when reality bites. We don't always know what's going on. We don't always know when God has steered the animals, sometimes without us ever knowing. Maybe this is what Mark means when he says the angels attended to Jesus. But I do know there are moments when my bad decisions could have been an awful lot worse. And I do know that there have been moments where God has refined me through said wilderness experiences, sometimes where he's uncovered what has been hidden, and sometimes he's brought breakthrough. The Blackmans have an incredible story they were telling us the other day over lunch about Isaac. I won't steal his thunder, but how he ended up being rushed into hospital, and what was uncovered at that point was a medical mistake that when they corrected it suddenly meant his mobility improved massively. It's like God had said, enough's enough in this moment. I'm going to take you through the wilderness to get you somewhere else. Wild animals, wilderness, temptation, even Satan exist. Mark 1:101 of Christianity, they're real, they're there. But they're not the dominant part of the story. Mark doesn't spend the next 16 chapters describing Jesus in the wilderness. It's like that much. Because Jesus is dominant in our story, and Jesus is the liberator for 15 chapters, not the wilderness. And in the coming chapters, we'll see the explosion of Jesus' ministry. And we'll see that danger didn't have the final say. And in the unanswerable questions of life, when danger feels dominant, it does not set the framework of what tomorrow looks like, because Jesus does. Many of you will know the hymn Amazing Grace, and you can probably sing the first two verses off by heart. You know the words. But verse 3 is the one that always gets me. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. But it's grace that has brought me safe thus far. And it's grace that will lead me home. And then verse 4, the Lord has promised good to me, and his word my hope secures. He will my shield and my portion be as long as life endures. And then he just, off he goes. Yea, when this flesh and heart shall fail, and mortal life shall cease, I shall possess within the veil a life with joy and peace. And this earth shall soon dissolve like snow, and the sun forbear to shine. But God who called me here below will be forever mine. And when we've been there 10,000 years, bright, shining as the sun, but no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. What a beautiful perspective on a story that starts with dangers, toils, and snares. It's a whole new trajectory that we are born into as the children of God. Not the light and momentary troubles and afflictions of now, but an eternal perspective of endless, glorious, shining like the sun for the praise of the God we worship. How beautiful is that? I'm going to invite the band back, but also just while they get themselves settled over there, try and block them out. Just going to have a little kind of sense where there will be people that are living in wilderness, struggling with wild animals, struggling with temptations.